It started off like any other peaceful weekend. I grabbed my fishing rod, walked down to the lake behind my house, and cast a line into the water, just trying to enjoy a quiet moment. But within minutes, I heard shouting from across the yard. A few members of the HOA were marching toward me like they owned the place, arms crossed, eyes blazing. They told me I wasn't allowed to fish there, that I was breaking the rules. I tried to stay calm and explain, "This isn't just my backyard. I own the lake. It's literally on my property deed." But they weren't having it. Next thing I know, one of them pulls out their phone and calls 911 on me. For fishing, on my own land. I stood there in disbelief, wondering how this was even real. I could already hear the sirens in the distance. My heart started racing, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I knew how fast these situations can escalate when people make false claims and let power go to their heads. When the police arrived, things took a turn none of us expected. The truth came out, and let's just say it didn't go the way the HOA thought it would. They weren't just wrong, they were trespassing. And I had every right to do what came next, but what really happened in those tense few minutes? What did the officers say when they realized the whole story? Let me walk you through every detail. To really understand why this moment felt so unreal, let me back up a bit. I've lived on this property for over 6 years. When I bought it, one of the biggest selling points was the private lake. It's on the deed, fully enclosed by my land, no public access. I've spent countless mornings and evenings out there just fishing, relaxing, or clearing my head. It's part of why I moved out here in the first place, to get away from all the noise. Now, about the HOA. Technically, my property is near the edge of their managed neighborhood, but I've never been part of their association. I don't pay dues. I don't vote in meetings, and I certainly don't follow their rules. They've tried a few times over the years to rope me in, sending letters and even leaving flyers on my gate. But I've always made it clear, I'm not a member. Still, they act like they have authority over everything around here. So when they saw me fishing, it wasn't really about the lake. It was about control. One of the board members, let's just call him Greg, has always had a problem with me not playing along. I think seeing me on the lake that day just pushed him over the edge. That's when he made the call. What's wild is, I actually saw him dial. He looked me straight in the eye, told the dispatcher I was trespassing, on my own land. And that's where things really started to spiral. As Greg stood there on the phone with 911, I could hear every word he said, claiming I was a stranger on private HOA property, that I was refusing to leave, and that he feared for his safety. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't even moving. I was literally holding a fishing pole and a tackle box. But the way he twisted the story, it was like he wanted me to look dangerous. Meanwhile, a couple of other HOA members stood behind him, whispering to each other like they were preparing some kind of neighborhood coup. The irony? One of them, Susan, had actually been over at my place before. I helped her dog once when it got out and ran onto my land. She didn't say a word, just looked away, like she didn't know me. That part stung more than I expected. While we waited for the police to show up, I started filming on my phone. Not to stir drama, but to protect myself. I wasn't about to let a twisted version of the truth become the official story. Greg noticed, and that's when things escalated again. He started shouting that I was violating privacy laws, which isn't true when you're on your own property. He told me to put the phone down before things get worse. I didn't. At that point, it wasn't even about fishing anymore. It felt like they were trying to intimidate me, to corner me into giving up my rights. And that's when the police car finally rolled up. The squad car came to a slow stop right near the edge of my driveway, lights flashing but no siren. 2 officers stepped out, calm but alert, eyes scanning the scene. Greg rushed over to them, like he'd been waiting all day for this moment, waving his arms and launching into a full rant. He pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal, saying I was trespassing, refusing to comply with HOA rules, and that I was threatening the safety of the neighborhood. I stayed where I was, still holding my fishing rod in one hand and my phone in the other. I kept recording quietly. One of the officers walked over to me while the other stayed with Greg and his group. The officer asked politely for my side, and I calmly explained. I told him I owned the land. I told him I had the deed to the lake. I even offered to show him property lines and documents. He nodded, listening carefully, but I could tell he was already sensing something was off. Meanwhile, Greg kept pushing, getting louder, demanding they arrest me. His voice cracked a bit, like he realized this wasn't going the way he thought it would. The other officer started asking Greg some very pointed questions. That's when Susan finally spoke up. She didn't say much, but it was enough. Her voice was shaky, and she wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. That was the moment I knew the truth was about to come out. Just when I thought things couldn't get more tense, the second officer radioed something back to dispatch and started walking toward me. I wasn't nervous about what I'd done. I knew I was in the right, but something in his expression had shifted. He asked me again if I could prove ownership, so I offered to take him to my house just a few steps away to grab the paperwork. As we started walking, Greg suddenly shouted, "You're not allowed to go with him alone! He's hiding something!" The officer turned and told Greg to stay back, firmly this time. Inside, I grabbed the deed and property map from my file cabinet, something I hadn't looked at in months. As I handed them over, I realized something strange. The document clearly showed that not only did I own the lake, but a strip of land that ran behind 3 of the HOA board members' homes, including Greg's. Turns out their fences actually extended a few feet into my property. That discovery hit me like a brick. Outside, the other officer was starting to get visibly annoyed with the HOA group. He asked who gave them the authority to enforce anything on land not managed by the association. Greg dodged the question, but his face was turning red. And Susan? She finally looked up and said softly, "We didn't know for sure. We just assumed." That was it. All this chaos, all this drama, was based on assumptions, and now it was all unraveling. The officer studied my documents for a moment, then walked back with me to the group. He held up the papers and calmly explained to everyone that not only did I own the lake, but the property line extended behind several of their homes. He even pointed out the exact boundaries. You could hear a pin drop. Greg's jaw tightened, and he tried to argue, but the officer cut him off. "Sir, you're the one trespassing," he said. "You and anyone else who stepped onto this property without permission." That was the moment everything flipped. I thought Greg might back down, but instead, he doubled down. "Well, if this is your land, then you've been letting it overgrow and become an eyesore. That's a violation of local code." It was such a stretch. Even the officers blinked in disbelief. I told him I mow, I maintain the area, and there's no city ordinance violation. The officers nodded. They'd seen enough. They politely told the HOA group to leave immediately and warned them not to step foot on my land again without written permission. But just as they turned to go, the final twist hit. One of the officers pulled me aside and said, "You might want to talk to a surveyor. If these documents are right, Greg's back fence is built 6 feet into your property." I paused. 6 feet. That meant Greg had been encroaching on my land all along, while trying to accuse me of breaking rules that never applied to me in the first place. After the officers left, and the HOA crew finally walked off my property, quiet and defeated, I stood there for a minute, just taking it. All in. What started as a peaceful morning of fishing turned into a full-blown showdown over land ownership, HOA overreach, and years of assumptions. But now, the truth was out. Not only had I done nothing wrong, but Greg and the others had been in the wrong for years without even realizing it. That 6-foot strip behind his fence? It changed everything. The next week, I hired a licensed surveyor just to make things official. And sure enough, the documents didn't lie. Greg's fence was on my property, by quite a bit. I could have taken legal action, filed for removal, or even forced them to pay for using my land all this time. But instead, I sent a letter with the survey attached and simply asked them to move the fence by the end of the month. No drama, just facts. I haven't heard a word from Greg since. The whole experience taught me something I didn't expect. When people feel powerless, they sometimes try to create power where they don't have any. The HOA didn't care about fishing. They just didn't like not being in control. But the law doesn't bend to control. It follows property lines, deeds, and facts. Now, I fish in peace again. No drama, just the sound of water, birds, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing where I stand, literally and legally.